Picture this, you just got home after another long day at work, make yourself some dinner, maybe you just heat up some leftover pizza or something, feed your cat, maybe even play with her a little, and finally, after all of this, you get to log into your favorite game you've been looking forward to all day. Cooney Pop 2 Double Dash. I mean Path of Exile 2. You look at your atlas, find a map with a boss, a breach, and whatever else you're into on there, hop in a portal, and this happens. You think to yourself, I guess I should have seen the slam coming, my bad. You've lost your waystone, 10% of your experience towards the next level, all the rewards tied to the map like breach and the boss, and understandably, you're a little bit ticked off. Not a great way to start your gaming session for the thing. Still, you're undeterred. You decide you want to try getting your last 2 ascendancy points again since you recently got some upgrades for your build, and for sure this time you'll be able to beat it. Forbidden Sanctum, Trial of the Sekema, here I come. You breeze through floors 1 through 3, even though you got some really shitty afflictions, have a bit of trouble getting through floor 4 since it's your first time here, but you manage to make it to the boss relatively unscathed. Don't screw this up, you think to yourself before taking a few steps forward to initiate the fight. Things are looking good, your damage is solid, you're not dying to hits coming your way, and you've got like 7,000 honor. What could possibly go wrong? Then things take a turn. You walk on this glowy patch because you've got no idea what the hell is going on and the boss pieced out. Next thing you know, you're running as fast as you possibly can, which apparently is slower than your grandmother crossing the street, desperately dodge rolling just to try to reach these glowy hourglass thingies, and time's up. The game might as well say, GG, get good, loser. You close the game and hover that uninstall button. Path of Exile 2 hates you. Or at least that's what it feels like. In this video, I'm going to go over some of the things that I've found to be the most frustrating about playing this game while still acknowledging the good stuff, because at the end of the day, there is a lot of good here, like the visuals and music, the new skill gem system, and the boss fights. These are all awesome. I just feel like it's being brought down a little bit by some of the more annoying features the game has to offer, and I'm honestly finding myself rage quitting every other time I boot it up. Real quick, if you have opinions of your own, which I'm sure you do, go ahead and let me know what they are. I might not always respond, but I do read every comment I get. Alright, before going into some of my negatives, let's start with something I think Path of Exile 2 mostly nailed: the campaign. I think that gameplay during the campaign is incredibly solid. The moment-to-moment action is engaging, I'm having to dodge out of enemy attacks regularly, and the boss fights are just so much better than other ARPG campaign bosses, especially including PoE 1. They're tough, their attacks are realistically dodgeable, although they might not feel like it on a first attempt, and there's a real feeling of learning the boss fight and getting good at it before you beat it. Of course, some builds have an easier time than others, but generally speaking, I think overcoming bosses in the campaign is really satisfying and that it's in a good spot. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they cook up for Acts 4 through 6 in the future, especially since I think Cruel is where the combat in PoE 2 starts to fall apart. Pacing-wise, I personally think Acts 2 and 3 are a little bit too long for my taste, and I'm concerned that future acts might push that even further, but Act 1 is basically perfect. Not too long and not too short, just right. From a storytelling standpoint, I think they dropped the ball a little bit, having promised that, and I'm paraphrasing here, players who beat the campaign will actually be able to know what the story is about this time, referring to the fact that the vast majority of players who played PoE 1 regularly for thousands of hours really had no clue what was going on in the story. So far, I think PoE 2 has barely done anything to improve on this front. It's like a tiny bit better than in PoE 1, since there is the occasional segment of the game where you're running around accompanied by an NPC who can talk to you on the go and sort of explain things that are happening to you, but for the most part, you're still forced to listen to monologue after monologue while standing around doing nothing else productive with your time if you want to actually understand what's going on. Add in some drama. I mean, people love to hate on both D4 and Wolcen with some good reason, but like their stories are just way more engaging than PoE 2's, and in my opinion, it entirely has to do with the fact that you don't get to become attached to any of the characters PoE 2 introduces to you. I remember Una because she's cute, and I remember the hooded one because he's the hooded one, and that's it. But also, like, it's an ARPG, does it really need to have an engaging story? I don't think so, but it definitely wouldn't hurt. I get that GGG went for the classic way of telling stories in ARPGs, but like, it's 2025, guys, I think it's time to adapt a little bit. And you know, that's kind of going to be the theme of many of my frustrations with the game currently, the fact that some gameplay systems are simply stuck in the past. Take trading, for example. Trade in PoE 2 sucks. You know it, I know it, the devs know it, we all know it, and have known it for a very long time, might I add, and yet PoE 2 still launched with the same archaic out-of-game trading experience from like 1999. Now don't get me wrong, the actual functionality of searching for items is more or less unparalleled and ridiculously good, but, and this is a huge but, trading for gear is still a miserable experience. Having to search for an item on a website, then click a button which sends a private message to the seller, who then has to invite you to the party, stop whatever the hell he's doing, you both go to his not safe for work hideout, and then you guys can finally make the trade. And that's assuming the dude even responds in the first place. Like, that's just awful, man. I'm used to it and I'll do it since the alternative is plain SSF, and that's just not really my cup of tea. But I hate it. At least we've got the currency exchange system in-game, which in my opinion entirely disproves the notion that bringing a trade site equivalent in-game, aka a functioning auction house, would be bad for the game, but alas, still no auction house cause friction. That said, I don't envy the developers' positions. I'm sure there's quite a bit of internal debate on the subject, never mind all the external debate, and that coming to a solution that satisfies everyone is simply not realistic. They're kinda darned if they do and darned if they don't at this point, since the community is so split on the topic. In my ideal version of PoE 2, there'd be a trade league with a proper in-game auction house that works exactly how you would want it to, and there'd also be an SSF league with somewhat boosted drops. Basically like what Last Epoch is doing. I think that's a nice compromise, and the game as a whole would be better for it. But that's just me, and let me know what you think in the comments. Alright, let's talk about something a little bit less spicy that I think pretty much everybody can agree on. When it comes to the endgame, the on-death effects are just too much. If these only came up once every 10 maps or so and you could actually see them, then you know what, I'd probably be fine with it. But these explodey orbs that chase you around after an enemy has died when you're trying to loot their dead bodies, yeah, nobody liked them in PoE 1, and yet somehow it feels like they've literally doubled down on them, and every other rare you kill has some sort of modifier like this. Nobody likes dying to an explodey orb. It feels cheap and punishing for no particular reason other than the fact that it actually poses a real threat to you, unlike some of the rare enemies themselves, once you've decided to follow a meta build anyhow. Which, yeah, of course that's a whole thing I want to get into too, and I will soon, but yeah. On-death effects, man, they're just not fun, and if something is simply not fun, is it wrong of me to question why it's still in the game? Like having to refill your flasks at the well. Gosh, it's so immersive, right? Now, dying to an on-death effect might not feel so bad if there weren't also all of these downsides to death in the game. When you die in the campaign, it's a minor setback, and you might get a little frustrated that all the enemies have respawned, but overall, I think it's pretty fair to the players. Dude, dying while mapping, or I guess waystoning, it's so punishing. A single death in the waystone means you lose your precious experience towards your next level, you lose whatever loot was on the ground when you died, you lose the rest of the map you were doing, so if you die early into a waystone, GG get wrecked, noob, and you have to do the map again without any of the bonus content in it that it had on the Atlas, just so you can keep progressing. Like, holy shit, that is so punishing. Just one or two of those would have been fine, but like all of that? That's kind of insane, IMO, and here I am, still playing. I'm optimistic in that I think grinding gear games will do something about the balance in here that makes death a little bit less punishing, but I'm also not expecting a complete overhaul. PoE 2 is supposed to be punishing in accordance with the Holy Vision, and I think that's okay. It's just maybe not the perfect game for me, which is totally fine. Maybe I'm not the target audience, and that's okay. Right, so on-death effects are annoying, particularly if your build is not the tankiest, and that kinda leads into another frustration I have with the game in its current state, and that's character balance. Allow me to start this off by saying balancing power in video games always appears easier than it really is, and that in Path of Exile 2's case, I mean, you've got the skill tree, all the ascendancies, all the different uniques and weapon types and skills, and like all of that jumbled together equals balance. Like, it's just never going to be perfect, and that's something we all have to accept. That being said, I hate that my build I was playing hit a wall at tier 15 waystones, and that I felt like I had no other choice besides swapping to a different one that completely blows the build I had worked on out of the water. I was doing a fizz damage based crossbow build using high velocity rounds for a single target and galvanic shards for clear, but now I've switched to a budget Howa build with shock burst rounds that makes maps and boss fights pretty dang trivial. I do like 5 times as much damage and I can tank much bigger hits with ease. It's crazy. There are always going to be meta builds, I am well aware. It's just a little frustrating that the difference between a meta build and one that you throw together yourself is so humongous. I mean, it's literally like playing the game on easy mode. And while I actually think it's okay for a build to trivialize most content if it's been heavily invested into, like I'm talking builds worth a mirror or more here, slapping Howa on any attack build and modifying your gear and tree to support it is not that expensive to get going. I mean, I'm working on an under 10 divine budget here, and it is crazy how strong this thing already is. I'm not sure what the solution is, besides try and balance the playing field a little bit better, but for one, I don't think it'll ever be perfect, and it's gonna take a lot of time for it to even get closer to that ideal. Especially when you factor in that we currently only have half the base classes and weapon types, yeah, it's gonna be a mess, and that's okay. It's just one of those things that kind of feels bad to me. I'm sure most of you who like doing things yourselves can kind of relate. Also, for what it's worth, guys, my prediction is that damage will be nerfed on these builds that are overperforming and not the other way around. I think they want boss fights to actually play out like boss fights, regardless of your gear, so yeah, I expect damage nerfs on the top performers, rather than big buffs to the builds that are already experiencing real boss fights all the time. Okay, let's move on to something else that's gonna need some time before it's in a really good spot, and that's crafting. Crafting in PoE 2 is honestly pretty laughable compared to PoE 1, but I think it's important to acknowledge that that is the intention here. The plan was always to have really basic crafting at launch so that they have tons of room to add new crafting options in with new content drops in the form of leaks. Things like Harvest, Bench Crafting, Beast Crafting, Syndicate Slamming, and Influence Spaces. I could see all of these returning in one shape or another, and I'm confident in saying that those will make crafting feel a whole lot more nuanced and interesting, and hopefully a bit less RNG reliant. That being said, right now, crafting is for sure in a weird spot. Like, it's hard to even call it crafting when all it really boils down to is hoping to hit good Exalt slams. Now, don't get me wrong, there is actually profit to be made here if you know what you're doing. It's how I've been able to afford my gear upgrades. Hell, I self-crafted this crossbow that is allegedly worth a lot, but the way you craft anything that isn't mirror tier worthy is by buying an item off of somebody else that has a couple mods you want on it already, and then hitting it with some exalted orbs or an essence depending on the base, I guess, and hoping for the best. It's literally just gamba, and I don't know, that's kind of lame. I've been crafting crossbows for Hawa builds by just buying good bases with plus levels to projectile skills and either attack speed or elemental damage with attacks, and slamming on exalts on them, hoping they hit whichever mod it's missing with a good roll. I've been able to sell a few of the crossbows that hit for a few divines, but there are dozens of failed attempts that just get vendored. The decision to remove alterations and scours is actually one that I think I agree with fundamentally, since it actually allows for a handful of these items we identify to actually have some value to other players, since you can't reliably start a craft from zero without omens, which are just, we might as well pretend they don't exist, right? But the process of trading for those bases that already have some decent rolls is quite miserable, so I think that for this to feel better as a player who wants to do some crafting, there needs to be an in-game auction house with instant buyout. Then you don't have the hassle of having to whisper tons of people and just hope that they answer. And if GGG is really determined to not give us that auction house, which unfortunately I think they are, then yeah, give us alterations and scours back. Alright, I saved the best for last here. This is one of those things that I really think is a fundamental problem with the endgame, and hell, even some of the campaign, but mostly endgame. And it's something that I think GGG will not budge on, because they're like being really weird about the whole topic, and that's zone layouts. God, the majority of these waystone layouts are just awful. Like, they suck the life out of you. There's so much backtracking to do to find every single last rare in a map, and I don't know about you, but backtracking to me does not equal fun. Now, I know that we have checkpoints in maps which are helpful at times, and I do appreciate them, but they're also like not always in spots that make sense for you to teleport back to, but others are just straight up broken, like this one here, but I expect that to get fixed eventually. Anyways, I feel like checkpoints in maps are just a little band-aid solution. The problem is that the majority of maps we have to run are straight up not fun to run. I might love the aesthetic of an area, like Forge and Mire look dope, right? But god, they are terrible layouts. There is no right way to clear them. You just need to meander around till you hit a dead end and start meandering in a different direction. It just means that there's a lot of downtime in maps, which I think is boring. Now, should every map be a good layout? Probably not. Then they lose their identities, I guess. But right now, the ratio of good to bad layouts is really skewed towards the bad ones, and maybe that's where they could tune things. Related to this is the god-awful amount of obstructions and little gaps in the maps and these vertical slopes that you can't even see in maps like Willow. Like, who thought it was okay to have all of these annoying little rocks and holes that you get stuck on all the time? They're freaking everywhere. I mean, look at this. This is gross. And the slopes are cool when you can actually see them, but GGG had the bright idea to actually have slopes going downwards but away from your camera perspective, so you literally cannot see what is on the slope. I've often found myself getting stuck on enemies I didn't even know were there. There's a reason that isometric games never do this unless you can pan the camera around in a 3D space. The slopes are annoying for sure, but really my biggest issue is all these dumb little boulders and holes in the map that you wouldn't even know were areas you couldn't walk on by actually looking at the physical terrain. It's only when looking at the minimap that you can tell why you can't move over certain spots. It's just fundamentally messed up, restricts our ability to dodge out of the way of attacks, and it's, how should I put it? Miserable. Please reduce the amount of clutter in maps like Decay or Sulphuric Caverns. It's just obnoxious. Thank you. Also, while we're on the topic, can we please get a Delirium Fog opacity slider? I love Delirium, but I'm fed up with the gray fog that hides everything. Okay, to wrap things up here, I kinda wanna ask you guys a question since it's something that I think about pretty often, and I wouldn't be surprised if you do too, and I'm really not sure what to make of it. This is the question. Do you think that maybe we as gamers are setting our expectations too high in terms of what we are able to accomplish? Like, have we been playing games for so long now, decades really, that we pride ourselves in our ability to be good at the game, and that's actually what makes the endgame feel frustrating at the end of the day, because it makes us feel insecure about spending thousands of hours of our lives playing games and we feel like we're not accomplishing our goals. Maybe we ought to just let go of that pride and get the most fun out of the game that we can without really worrying about all this endgame shit. Like, wouldn't it be nice to just play a game, have fun with the campaign, reach the endgame, try it out a little bit, and simply accept that, hey, maybe I'm just a campaign guy, and that the endgame is just not for me. Maybe Path of Exile 2 doesn't hate you. Maybe you just need to go play something else. Bit of a loaded question, but yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys think. Also, I just want to be super real with you guys about the whole thumbnail and title of this video. I would have loved to just call this a My Problems with Path of Exile 2 or PoE 2 Early Access Review, or something less dramatic than what it ended up being, but the reality is that as a small YouTuber, those titles and basic thumbnails get zero traction. It's gotta be clickable, and well, this kind of approach unfortunately is the play. I'm really not all doom and gloom here. I think the future of Path of Exile 2 is actually very bright. As I said, I love the campaign for the most part. The revamped skill gem system is way more flexible and in my opinion allows for more freedom in trying things out as you're progressing on a character, and the boss fights are freaking fun to learn. It really is a solid start to the incredible game that I am confident Path of Exile 2 will become. Anyways, feel free to discuss down below, hit the like button if you enjoyed this type of video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.